Okay, welcome back everyone to Cafe Oleh. My name is Jay. I'm a volunteer with Nefesh B'Nefesh. I myself made Aliyah with them just over 15 years ago. And here at Cafe Oleh, we go over the everyday Hebrew you need here in Israel to succeed, whether that's learning how to read your utility bills or how to go grocery shopping and read nutritional labels, follow the news, even with the most rudimentary level of Hebrew, conduct an everyday conversation, get into a fight with someone, flirt, whatever it may be, but all the topics and all the words and all the expressions you probably haven't learned in Ulpan or in day school or in yeshiva or in university or even in your previous trips here in Israel. But when you're a full-time Israeli like myself, they're really important to know. As always, all of our previous sessions are up on YouTube. You can just go to youtube.com, type in Cafe Oleh or Nefesh B'Nefesh, and you'll see a playlist of all of our previous lessons. This one will be up in the next 1 to 2 days. So you can watch them on demand. You can go back. You can take a screenshot of the vocabulary. You can practice on your own. Really great resource for you. If you'd like to know when the next one comes up, you can just click the subscribe button under Nefesh B'Nefesh's account. And as with that, we are always interested in hearing from you what topics we have yet to cover that are important to you, not to you personally, but to you generally, right? So if there's a topic that we haven't discussed, please be in touch with Nefesh B'Nefesh. You can also write that here in the chat window. In the Zoom menu bar, you see both chat and Q&A. For anything that has nothing to do with this specific lesson we're about to get started with, future lesson requests, you don't like the color of my shirt, you want to critique me, you want to give me a compliment, that's for the chat. Anything else that has to do with today's specific class that you would like me to answer if we have time at the end of class is the Q&A. So I will not be checking the chat window this evening. I will, however, be posting a link there shortly thereafter, and will also be in the YouTube description when the video goes up in the next few days. So with that, we are going to do a very requested topic by you and a requested topic by me. I think this is one of the most important ones that we do here, which is what I would call media literacy. Media literacy for what we're doing here is how to read the top headlines of Israeli news, meaning Hebrew language news, even with the most basic understanding of Hebrew. Why is that important? Well, there's a couple, I would say 2 main reasons. Number one, you live here, right? The 2 official languages of Israel are Hebrew and Arabic. So barring your fluency in Arabic, you need to know Hebrew, and most things happen here in Hebrew, including the news. Second one, I would say second, and then there's a third. The second is that following the news, much less discussing the news, is Israel's national pastime. Even people who say that they don't like following the news, it makes them anxious, it makes them too worried, whatever that, they can talk about current events like nobody's business. That's also, we like to be opinionated here, but that's somewhat adjacent to the same topic. But the point is, everyone is well versed in what happens here. Those of you who have been in public transportation or in a cab, you know when the driver turns on the news at the top of the hour, that is a regular thing, right? The news is always at the top of the hour on most radio stations as well as on TV stations, some of them also on the half-hour mark. So there's always news because there's always something happening here in Israel. And the third, and this one I can't stress enough, for my fellow native English-speaking Olim, is that English language media that comes from Israel is not meant for local consumption. Full stop, period. Whether you're from the US or the UK, I know you like both of those, we're equal opportunity here. Local English language media, Times of Israel, Jerusalem Post, Haaretz English Edition, Israel National News, I-24, ILTV, they're all wonderful resources. They are not meant for real-time consumption living in Israel. Sometimes you'll luck out and a big breaking story will be covered at the same frequency, at the same duration as it is in Hebrew, but chances are they're not. I would say the average is anywhere between a 3 to 6 hour lag in stories that are making top headlines in the Hebrew language media and are not in English media. There's a lot of reasons for that, right? English language media, like I said, is not for local consumption. So there are certain art stories that are just not going to be covered in English because they're not important to people who don't live in Israel. Traffic jams, a big robbery, a God forbid, any type of crime that happens that doesn't involve geopolitics probably won't be covered in English and other things. But if you're living here in Israel, they're kind of important to know, meaning very important to know. So you're going to need to know that. And another way, by the way, I know that for those who want to pick a fight on this specific topic, those of you who read the Times of Israel, which is otherwise a great resource for in-depth as well as ongoing news and investigations, their live feed, their live headlines, when they are showing it's in bright red, you can't miss it, only starts at about 3 or 4 in the afternoon Israel time, which is the beginning of the morning of the workday on the US East Coast time, right? Israel on Hebrew language and Arabic and Russian and all the other local news sources for locals, those news headlines are going 24 hours a day. They're not waiting for the US East Coast to open. They're about here. Again, want to live here, got to navigate Hebrew language media, and I'm going to show you how to do it with next to no Hebrew. I promise you, this is why we do this class every 4 to 6 weeks. It's that important to start reading the news in Hebrew, even if you don't understand anything that's going on, where to look, what to look out for. So with that, let me first share my screen, because what we're going to do first is do a little bit together of what some of the websites look like, and then we're going to go into depth about it. Okay, so let me just open it up as soon as I can get it. All right, here we go. So what I'm sharing with you right now is the live screen of Ynet. Ynet.co.il is the digital version of the Israeli daily newspaper called Yediot Achronot. You can see that here in the logo, right here in the center under that big obnoxious ad, which I will scroll down so you don't have to see that. Always interesting what they come up with those, right? So Ynet, and then you see under it in stylized letters, Yediot Achronot. Yediot Achronot is one of the oldest continuously circulated newspapers here in Israel, both in print and online. It's one of the most popular. It is considered mainstream, does not have an ideological bent. We'll do a future session on all the different media channels in Israel and what's their ideology. Ynet doesn't have an ideology. When it comes to their op-eds and in their coverage, it is as mainstream as it comes in Israel. They cover everything. And you'll see that with all the different categories that are listed here. So we're going to go through some of them, but I want to point out the most important things to understand what to look for, right? If you are pressed for time, if you're worried about not understanding things, we're going to first talk about the most important parts to look at when you're looking at a piece of news in Israel or the media in general. First off, is this thing that's scrolling from left to right? That is the ticker. Okay, in Israel, like I said, all the websites have tickers because there's always something happening. And you'll see here the latest one is at 1948. In Israel, we tell time 24-hour method, so that's 7:48. And you'll see they have a headline. If you put your mouse over it, it'll give you a synopsis of that story. But the point, though, here is that if you're looking for breaking news, this is what you're going to look for. This word here on the left-hand side called mivzak. Mivzak, in here, it's the plural, mivzakim, means breaking news. It's from the same root as the name of the telecommunications company, Bezek. Both of them come from this notion of a spark, a flash of light. And that's what this is, right? Like breaking news. It's breaking, and we need to cover all of it. So mivzakim, mivzakei chadashot. Chadashot is the word for news in Hebrew, coming from the word new, chadash. This scroll you will see on all the different websites in various iterations. Here on Ynet, it looks like this. On Walla, it's a little bit more narrow. On some of them, they don't even move. On Makor Rishon, which is for the national religious community primarily, it doesn't move. It just automatically refreshes after a certain amount of time. Okay, so you're looking for fast breaking news. It's this piece. Top headline, just like in other countries, just like in other outlets, obviously is going to be the biggest headline, right? So right here, got a picture on the left that illustrates the big headline, which is the top three lines here rather, the synopsis. If I were to click on this, I would get the full article. Okay, very simple to understand what is the top headline at that moment. If you scroll down just a bit, we're not going to go through the whole website. It is quite extensive. It goes top to bottom, and there's a lot of different topics. The next big headlines are these rectangular boxes here, or the featured stories. Sometimes they're not so important, right? So right here, for example, if you listen to their podcast, the current topic is Aisha שהפכה את צלילי המוזיקה לקולט, the woman who turned the sound of music into a cult. And it's about, is it about Julie Andrews? I can't tell right now. I'm not going to look at it. Point though is these are the featured stories. If I want to scroll down and see the top news stories, I would find Hadashot, right? Hadashot means news. This blue bar, all of these are the headlines to go to. Okay, all the major websites, news websites in Israel will look like this. They will have the ticker at the top or somewhere in the first initial part that you're looking at, and then it will have the top headline. What we're going to do today is we're going to translate together the top headline from earlier in the day that has to do with Israel. Doesn't have to do with the picture that you're seeing here. And then I'm actually going to show you another website that condenses the news from the previous day into really simple Hebrew. So this is going to be great homework for all of you moving forward to look at on your own, and I'll share the link. Don't worry about it. We'll get there shortly. But first, I want to share. So this was from earlier today. I took a screenshot of today. It was shortly after noontime, and a big story that came out. We're going to translate this news story together, but this is how it looked earlier in the day, right? All these tickers, some of them turned into actual full news stories. Some of them were just were quotes or parts of other stories. It really varies on a given day, right? This news ticker, by the way, will also include someone is hurt in an accident in Israel. Someone is guilty of something else. Remember, it is a country, but we're a small country. We're 9+ million people. So what would otherwise be local news in some bigger countries is national news here. So those are things like crime. Those are things like business. Those are all sorts of other things like that. Okay, so we're going to take this center story here, right? The top headline with the picture of these 4 people and the headline on the right-hand side. And we're going to translate together the big headline and then the short synopsis under it. We're not going to go through the whole article together. That's something you can do on your own. We had a question from the other week, which is a great question because we always like doing this media literacy. How can I follow up? Jay, how can I follow up on the topics that we do? Just like on other news sources, you see here on the left-hand side of this red bar. The red bar, by the way, are all the different topics and categories of media that Ynet covers. You see, just like in all other places, the good old magnifying glass, right? That thing that otherwise prevents people in all those Facebook groups from asking the same question 50 times. You can just click on that and find out your answer. So if you wanted to find out the topic that we did many months ago about the ban on single-use plastics, you could type in some of the keywords that we went through that day into this magnifying glass, and you'll be able to find all the news coverage about it. Okay, so with that, let me share with you today's vocabulary list. Sorry, just 1 second. Make sure that it's open. Second, there we go. Okay, so let's get started. As I said, I took a screenshot of those 4 people. If you didn't know what this was, you still know that it's the top story of the news because it's the biggest headline. It's got people's faces, it's got Israeli flags in the background, and it's got this building. Those of you who know a little bit about Israel and its national institutions, you know that that is the Supreme Court of Israel. And what is this article about? Let me scoot on over after we see those 4 lovely faces. So first off, you see, because this is the top headline, it also is right under the date. So as you see here, this is how the date is written in all the news websites. So if you want to see the date, you can just click on this. If you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the date, you can just click on this. So as you see here, this is how the date is written in all the news websites. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the date, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. So if you want to see the time, you can just click on this. sources when it comes to Hebrew language news sources. It'll give you the secular, the Gregorian date, right? Date, month, year here in Israel. And it'll give you the Jewish calendar date on the left, right next to it. Okay, so Kaf Ba'adar Aleph, Tashpab is the Hebrew date, 21st of February 2022, Gregorian date. Okay, what was that picture about and what is it telling us now? I'm going to read it and then we're going to go through it together. The first off, just the headline here, these two big bolded lines here. L'rishona ba'elyon, shofet muslimi ve'isha memotza mizrahi. Okay, what's going on here? So first off, l'rishona be'elyon, rishona. Remember we did numbers a few weeks ago? Rishon and rishona, right, mean the first. Rishon is masculine, rishona is feminine. L'rishona means for the first time. It is a shortened way to say bapam rishona, for the first time or in the first time. But l'rishona is the typical way that we use in Hebrew to indicate something is happening for the very first time, right? L'rishona, for the very first time. For the first time, l'rishona is the word that we typically use instead of saying bapam rishona. You'll see that as well, right? It'll write out literally for the first time. But this is often a way to understand that something is breaking, it's new, it hasn't happened before, it's unprecedented, it's not using the word for precedent, it's just using for the first time. Or in a first is another way to translate this. Ba'elyon. Now remember that this is for a Hebrew-speaking audience. A Hebrew-speaking audience will automatically know what Ba'elyon is. I don't suppose that all of you do. So that's why I wrote it out here in our second line. After l'rishona, ba'elyon. Ba'elyon is short for Beit HaMishpat HaElyon. Beit HaMishpat HaElyon, Beit HaMishpat is a court. Beit Mishpat is a court. Beit HaMishpat HaElyon, that ha indicates it's a definite article. It's a specific type of court. It is the highest court. Elyon is upper or highest. In which case, the Supreme Court. This is how we say the Supreme Court in Israel. I highly recommend for those of you who want to know more about how the Supreme Court works, and we'll get into a little bit of it in this lesson, but not so much. Highly recommend reading the Wikipedia article entitled Supreme Court of Israel. Most, if not, I would say all of the Israel-related articles on Wikipedia are actually really good, unbiased, well-researched, and the Supreme Court one is fantastic. It had things in there, just getting ready for this lesson, I had no idea about. Really important for you all to read, especially those of you making Aliyah. You should know how the judicial system works in the country that you are moving to. I think that's an understatement. Okay, so what is it saying here? L'rishona be'elyon, for the first time in the Supreme Court. Shofet muslimi ve'isha memotza mizrahi. Shofet is a judge. Okay, I didn't put that here. That's a basic word. You can look that up on your own, but shofet is a judge. What are we seeing though? A shofet muslimi ve'isha memotza mizrahi. For the first time in the Supreme Court, there is a Muslim male judge. Shofet and Muslimi are both masculine, so we know we're talking about a male judge, but who's Muslim, Muslimi, Muslim, or Muslim, as some of you will incorrectly say. Ve'isha memotza mizrahi. Ve'isha, and a woman, memotza mizrahi. Memotza. Excuse me. Motza, as you see here, our next word. Row 4 means descent or ancestry. It is a very important word, and we're going to get to a little bit in explaining why in a second here in Israel and Israeli sociology. But motza means descent or ancestry. Mizrahi. Mizrahi refers to Bnei Edot HaMizrach. This is the category that's applied to Jews who are coming from anywhere other than Ashkenazi or Sephardi backgrounds. So think Iran, Yemen, Ethiopia, Iraq, anywhere that isn't either Ashkenazi or Sephardi is often called Mizrahi. Mizrahi literally means Eastern. In old-fashioned language, we could even say Oriental. We don't use that term much anymore, but Mizrahi means Eastern. Okay. So what is it saying here altogether? For the first time at the Supreme Court, there will be a Muslim judge and a Mizrahi female judge. Why is this important? We talk about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, in most polls for the last few decades, enjoys the highest public support of any public institution in Israel, more than the president, more than the prime minister, more than the Knesset, more than the police, more than the army. The one institution that most people find to be the most balanced, the most fair, the most accountable is the Supreme Court. Supreme Court is comprised of 15 judges. It is not a life term. They are either there until the age of 70, or they are retire, or they are forced out by a vote. But it's a total bench of 15 judges. Not all 15 judges serve on every case. It serves as both the ultimate appellate court, so anything that comes up through the district courts in Israel goes to the Supreme Court if it's appealed. It also can rule on its own when issues of national importance come in. So for example, issues that arise in the Knesset that need to be determined their legality after the legal advisor of the Knesset goes through it and the Attorney General, the Supreme Court can get involved to issue a verdict if something is with regards to its legality. So it has both things happening at once. Israel already has female judges. The current president of the Supreme Court is a woman. We also have non-Jewish judges sitting on it. In the past, as you see from this article, this title, they have been Christian Arabs. This is now the first time a Muslim Arab judge has been appointed to the bench. The person in particular, I'm going to get through their names, actually served in the Tel Aviv District Court for many years and is a judge himself. These are not small things, and we're going to get to a little bit of how judges are picked in just a second as we read the rest of this synopsis here. So let's get going. I'm going to read it slowly, and we're going to go through the words sentence by sentence. חברי הוועדה לבחירת שופטים אישרו את מועמדות השופטים ח'אלד כבוב, גילה כנפי שטייניץ, רות רונן ועורך דין יחיאל כשר לכהונה בבית המשפט העליון. Okay, we'll stop here. First two lines, one whole sentence. So, חברי הוועדה, that is our next grouping, next vocab word here. חברי הוועדה mean the committee members. חבר, we've talked about before, can mean a friend. It can mean a boyfriend. It also can mean a member. Okay, so a member of something is also a chaver. Chavera is a female, and so forth. Chavre is the plural, right? Chaverim is friends or members. Chavrei avada is a compound word. They're both nouns, and so chaverim turns into chavrei. Va'ada is a committee. Okay, there's both va'ad and va'ada. I'm not going to get into the semantics of it, but va'ada is the word that we typically use when it comes to governmental things. In this case, what kind of committee is it? Chavrei havada livchirat shoftim, the Judicial Appointment Committee. Okay, the members of the Judicial Appointment Committee. This is a committee that chooses Israel's judges. It's comprised of people from all three parts of Israel's government. So both from the judicial as well as executive and legislative branches. So there are members of Knesset who sit on this this committee, the legislative. There are members of the government, including the justice minister who sits on this committee, executive, and there are retired judges who sit on this committee, judicial. Okay, so all three branches of government are represented in this committee, and this committee decides who sits on the bench, a rather important thing in many countries, certainly here in Israel. And what happened today? Ishru et muamadut hashoftim. Ishru. Ishru is our next verb. This is a great verb to know. We use this a lot in Israel and everyday Hebrew. La'asher. La'asher is to approve. Okay, so in this case, it's talking about the members of the committee approved, right? So it's conjugated for past tense, plural, third person. I'm giving you the infinitive, so you can go and conjugate it on your own, and you can also see how it's conjugated here in the headline. But just so that you know, the word le'asher is very important. It means to approve, and ishur is an approval or an okay. But le'asher is a very important verb that we use obviously all the time. So, חברי הוועדה לבחירת שופטים אישרו, so the members of this committee approved, את מועמדות השופטים. מועמדות, our next word here, row 7, candidacy. Right? A muamad is a candidate. That could be for an election, that could be for a contest, anything is a muamad. Muamadut is the act of being a candidate or a candidacy. Okay, so the members of the committee approved et muamadut hashoftim. They approved the candidacy of the judges. Khalid Kabub, that's one of the guys' names who was approved. Gila Kanfe Steinitz, second person, woman. Ruth Ronen, third person. All three of these are judges, right? Muamadut hashoftim, the approval, the candidacy of the judges, and then list those three names. So all those three names are judges. And how do I know that? Because the next word here in the middle of the second line here, ve'orech din. You see that those four letters that have two apostrophes in the middle. First off, we've talked about this before. Anytime you see apostrophes between the second to last and last letters, you know, without a doubt, it is an abbreviation or an acronym for something. So I need to stop and remember what that is. This one is always standing for Oleh Din. Oleh Din is a lawyer, or Oleh Din, depending on gender. Oleh Din, male lawyer, Oleh Din, female lawyer. It is not pronounced as a word, this acronym, but it's understood to take the place of Oleh Din because it takes a long time to read that. So the members of the committee approved the candidacy of the three judges that we just named before and a lawyer, right? So one of the judges who's going to sit on the Supreme Court is not currently sitting as a judge. The three others are. This fourth one is not. He's a lawyer, okay? And that's part of the rules of the candidacy for the Supreme Court. You need to be an active lawyer, I forget for how many years, or an active judge. You don't have to be a sitting judge in order to be considered for the Supreme Court. Okay, but we know that the fourth candidate who is approved is Oleh Din Yechiel Kasher. That's his name, Yechiel Kasher. Lekehuna bebeit hamishpat elyon. Kehuna. Kehuna, think of what it has as its root, as its shoresh. We've talked about this all the time because it's really important in Hebrew. The shoresh, the three letters that make up most Hebrew words in a very specific order, are destiny. They give you the essence meaning of that word. In this case, kehuna. What does it look like? What does it sound like? Sound like anyone to Kohen? Kaf, He, Nun. If you thought so, you would be right. Kohen, priest, right? In Jewish tradition, kehuna is a term. It's someone who sits in office. Another way to translate this is office or tenure, but it's referring usually to an official, right? So in this case, I'm using the word term. You could also use office, any of those words that indicate someone in a position of power who's sitting in that role, right? So kehuna means term, and these four people have been approved lekehuna bebeit hamishpat elyon, in the Supreme Court. So we have four new judges to sit in that 15-judge panel in the Supreme Court, and these are the four of them. Okay, so let's continue for the end of that sentence. Chaver Knesset, we've talked about this before. When you, again, it's an abbreviation because I see those two apostrophes, but also that specific one, Chaf and Chet and Kaf, stand for Chaver Knesset. Chaver Knesset, as you see here in row 9. So, Chaver Knesset Rotman, מהאופוזיציה התנגד לכולם, and then in quotation marks in the parentheses, klika skura, shaked tamcha rak bishnayim. Okay, so what does this mean? חבר כנסת רוטמן מהאופוזיציה. חבר כנסת, so we know a member of Knesset, and it's immediately going to be followed by their last name, Rotman. In this case, it's referring to Simcha Rotman from Atzionut Adatit, a party that sits in the opposition. And it's a member of Knesset, Simcha Rotman, מהאופוזיציה, from the opposition. התנגד לכולם. התנגד, row 10 here, להתנגד means to oppose, right? We've probably heard the word neged, which means against. להתנגד is to oppose. A rather important term when you're talking in Israeli society when you want to disagree with someone or show your defiance of something, להתנגד, to oppose, right? So it says here, חבר כנסת רוטמן מהאופוזיציה, member of Knesset Rotman from the opposition, התנגד לכולם. He opposed all of the candidates, all four of these candidates. In quotations, it says in parentheses, klika skura. Klika sounds just like what it's referring to in non-Hebrew, a clique. Skura is the word closed, so a closed clique. He's referring to them as, whether that's based on anything or not. Remember, he's in the opposition. Opposition in parliamentary democracy means they have to be against everything that the government is doing. So whether it's founded or not, that they're actually part of a closed clique, it's what he has to say. Shaked tamcha rak bishnaim. We're at the end of this third line, shaked. Again, this is for a native Hebrew-speaking audience living in Israel, so everyone knows who's reading this. Who is shaked? Okay, and we know it's a female because it's shaked tamcha. Tamcha is the next word that we have here. It's the verb litmoch, which means to support. So whoever this shaked is, supported rak bishnaim, only supported two of the candidates. Shaked is short for Ayelet Shaked. Ayelet Shaked is currently the Minister of the Interior. It's one of the very powerful roles in the Israeli government. Before this, in the previous government, she was the Justice Minister. So the reason why it's referring to her is that she's very much involved, both as the current Interior Minister and as the previous Justice Minister, in who's being picked as judges for the court. Very important role. She has quite a long story in trying to reform the judicial system here in Israel. That's why she's being referenced in this short synopsis. Okay, so חבר כנסת רוטמן מהאופוזיציה התנגד לכולם, קליקה סגורה, שקד תמכה רק בשניים. So member of Knesset Rotman from the opposition opposed all the candidates, saying that they were a closed clique, whereas Shaked supported only two of them. Last sentence, and then we're going to move on to perhaps an easier form of the news, but no less important. Last sentence here, Sar HaMishpatim Sa'ar. Sar, we've talked about before, means a minister. Sar HaMishpatim is specifically the justice minister. Sa'ar, it's referring to Gidon Sa'ar, right? Two different words. Sar with a sin is that first word. And the last name of this guy's name is Sa'ar. But in everyday Hebrew, we just simply say Sar, right? There's a little bit of a difference, but that ayin in the middle is usually not vocalized in everyday Hebrew, in everyday modern Hebrew. So Sar HaMishpatim Sa'ar, but you will hear it when it's announced in the news, on TV, on radio, to make sure that you understand the difference. Anyways, Justice Minister Sa'ar says, I know it's a quote because there's a colon and then two quotations, just like we have in English and other languages. הרכב מגוון ומאוזן, המשקף את הפסיפס החברתי. Great line, so I included every single word in this in the translation below. Let me see actually if I can move this down so you can see it while I translate it. Yes, great. Okay, שר המשפטים סער, הרכב מגוון ומזומן, מאוזן, המשקף את הפסיפס החברתי. הרכב מגוון ומאוזן. הרכב is, as you see here, composition, row 12. הרכב, we've had this word before in other situations. להרכיב ממשלה is to comprise, to put together a a government. We talked about this when it comes to elections. If you go to IKEA, also known as IKEA, and you ask for support in hovalot and halkava, hovalot vehalkava. Hovalot are movers, and halkava are installers, the people who put together the pieces of furniture. So helkev is the composition. It's the result of putting things together. Okay, so helkev meguvan umeuzan. Meguvan means diverse, and me'uzan means balanced. Okay, givun is diversity, and izun is balance. Right, so the one I really like about me'uzan in particular, I mean, meguvan's obviously a very important word, diverse. Me'uzan is related to the words for balance, izun. It's also related to ears, oznaim, right? Because your balance is situated in your inner ears, right? When you are out of balance, oftentimes it's a disturbance in your ear canals, right? Scales, like the scales of justice, and also the astrological sign Libra, happens to be mine, me'aznaim. Okay, so we'll hear this word again and again. Me'uzan also, by the way, a very important word in Israel, very important word in Hebrew that you're, again, probably not going to learn in day school, horizontal, right? Me'uzan means balanced, and so it also means horizontal in modern Hebrew. Pretty cool, I think. Okay, so helkev meguvan ume'uzan, a diverse and balanced composition, hameshakef et psifas ha'chevrati. Hameshakef. When you see the letter hey in front of a present tense verb, in this case, meshakef, it also means she. It's a fancier, more formal way to say she. Okay, hamshakef in the present tense is the same thing as shemeshakef. So a balanced and diverse composition, hameshakef, which the shakef means to reflect, as you see here, the next word. A balanced and diverse composition comprising all these four judges, which reflects, or that reflects, et hapsefas achevrati. Psefas is a mosaic, right? Those little bits of glass or tile or whatever to create something bigger. Achevrati. Chevrati, we've had this word before. Social. A great line, obviously an important line from the Justice Minister, who needs to support the institution of the Supreme Court in some form. So he's saying that these four choices, the first woman of Mizrahi background, the first Muslim male judge, and two others represent a diverse and balanced composition to the court. Why is this important? Just like in other countries, we know that the composition of a court is very important, that it both reflects the diversity of the people who live there, as well as various understandings of the law, various applicabilities of the law, and so forth. So that's why it's very important to highlight that these people were included. It's also worth noting, there was a recent criticism of the president of the state of Israel for not taking into account, not taking more seriously petitions filed to the Supreme Court at the hands of Israelis of Mizrahi and Sephardi backgrounds. The issue of ethnicity, Jewish ethnicity within the Israeli Jewish population is still very raw, and it comes up quite a lot. On the one hand, there have been many inroads made since the founding of the State of Israel, when there was rampant discrimination, if not racism, towards some populations versus others. On the other hand, some of those feelings and tendencies have not gone away, or haven't been addressed in a way that many people feel has been restorative in any respect. So it's specifically important that they pointed out that a female judge, and a female judge who is of Mizrahi background, was appointed to the Supreme Court. First time that's ever happened in Israel's 70 plus years of existence. That's a big deal, just like with a Muslim male judge as well, no less important. So a big day for the further diversity of the Supreme Court, as well as its institution, whatever you think of it. Now, we're going to pause here. Before I get to questions, I want to show you what we talked about: news media literacy, which is, again, really important. What I'm going to show you now is something that is going to help you along the road. It is not the same thing in that this is not going to be breaking news. This is not going to help you in understanding the news as it happens, but this is news that will help you after the fact understand what's going on. So ongoing stories, but equally important to understand vocab that's being used in everyday news and current events. This is a great resource. So first off, I'm breaking my rule. I'm posting this in the chat. We will also put this in the description in the YouTube as well. Okay, but I'm going to show you now a great resource for those of you who want to be able to follow the news, but it is not the easiest thing, and quite understood if you could follow along with this. This is a website. I just posted it in the chat box, and again, we'll make sure that you get this link as well. This is called Chadshon. Chadshon be'ivrit kala, as you see at the top. Chadshon comes from the word chadashot, news. Chadshon, when you see the suffix on at the end of words, vav nun, it means something small. Okay, so a yeled is a boy, a yaldon is a little boy. Chadshon is small news, little news. Be'ivrit kala, in simple Hebrew, in easy Hebrew. This is put out by the Israeli Ministry of Education to help people with Hebrew. This is a free resource. You have now the website. It's posted in the chat box, and we'll make sure that it's in the YouTube thing again. And every day at the first thing in the morning, as you see here, this is from today, this morning, at 6:10 in the morning, they not only put the main headlines of the previous day's news, but if we scroll down here, you can also listen to it. And if you can hear it, let me just make sure that it is, I actually want to make sure that you can hear this. So just 1 second. I'm going to reshare it to make sure that you can hear it. Optimize, share sound. If you can't hear this, you'll certainly be able to hear it on the website.
בוקר טוב, היום יום שני, כ' באדר א' תשפ"ב, 21 בפברואר 2022. הנה הכותרות. רוחות מלחמה באירופה. נמשכת המתיחות בין רוסיה למדינות המערב. נשיא ארצות הברית ג'ו ביידן ונשיא רוסיה ולדימיר פוטין.
Okay, so as you can hear, it is it's only 1 minute and 52 seconds of it. It's the woman introducing herself, not herself, but giving you the time, the date. And hine kotarot. Kotarot are headlines. And then she gives the headlines, and she's reading all of these out. And you can hear her tone, right? It is very slow. It is very balanced. And if you look at these words, it also includes the nikud, the dot and bars that indicate vowel sounds. So if there are words that you don't know or they don't suppose that you would know, you're able to understand how they're pronounced. She will read all of these through the day, all the way to the end here. And you can go through previous ones as well. On the right-hand side, you can see lexicon. You can see words that often come up in the news. Roshei tevot v'kitzurim, we're here on the right-hand side, right? So milim u'musagim, words and expressions. Roshei tevot v'kitzurim, abbreviations and acronyms. Pitgamim, aphorisms, cliches, jargon. Anashim, people. You can click on each of these, and if you click, we've done classes on abbreviations before, right? They will give you all the major ones, and they'll tell you what it's short for. So if you see, excuse me, for example, Aleph Yud certainly usually stands for, as it says here, Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, right? And you can go through all of these based on the Aleph bets here. It's a tremendous resource, folks. So I highly encourage you. This is not going to help you understand breaking news, but this is going to help you understand news as it unfolds, right? All of these topics here, It's talking about what's happening on the Ukrainian-Russian front and happening here in Israel. These are typically stories that have a long burn, so you're able to go back and read them and understand the words that are going through it. And you'll see here on the left-hand side, there's that word again, mivzakim. That's our favorite word when it comes to breaking news. Now, granted, this is being told about the day after, but if I were to click on any of these, for example, the second one, because I see the word olim, it gives me another audio bit, which is absolutely awesome. I could listen to this and it's going to read out the Hebrew that's beneath it. The Hebrew, again, is meant to be simple Hebrew. And the words that are bolded here are meant to look up. So if I were to click on any of these, let's say nachatu, right? כ-75 עולים מאוקראינה נחתו. If I didn't know what nachatu was, I could click on it and it gives me a Hebrew definition of it, so I can stay within Hebrew. It's a great way to learn it. ירידה מהאוויר לאדמה. נחיתה means arrival or descension, descending. It's the act of a plane coming down, so taxiing, landing is the fancier, the simple word rather, right? And it gives you the grammatical construct, how it's built, it's shoresh, it gives you examples of it, and then it gives you here, all of these links are every time that word is used in the last several weeks, if not months. This is an awesome resource, folks. I highly encourage you to read it and use it. And when you click on those mivzakim and it has an audio thing, you can follow along with the listening. So if you didn't know what nachatu was, if you didn't know what הסוכנות היהודית ומשרד העלייה וקליטה was, you could click on that and find out what it is, right? This happens to be about 100 olim from the Ukraine arriving in Israel because of the current status of things in the that neck of the woods. A great resource, again, for those of you who are looking to keep up with the news. This isn't going to be breaking news. This is going to be the day after, but this is an ongoing resource provided by the government for you for free to help improve your media literacy and, more importantly, your vocabulary of everyday things. Highly recommend this website. As you hear, can't say it enough. I'm going to stop here as I see we have some Q&A. Let me pull it up. Shamai asks, I'm seeing Ynet in English. Is that because I'm still in Canada or will that remain? Great question. Ynet, like all the major sources, will also have an English language counterpart. In Ynet's case, ynetnews.com. Ynetnews.com is not a trustworthy resource because it is rarely updated. And when it's updated, it doesn't include everything that's in Ynet. Okay, that's a really important distinction to be made. Just because it's in English doesn't mean it's made for local consumption. If you look at what's in Ynet News particularly, there are days in which it's not updated or it's barely updated. And the English often is atrocious. Atrocious, folks. Ynet.co.il is the Hebrew website. You can find that all around the world. Just type in ynet.co.il, you will get to the Hebrew website. Sanford asks, what's the difference between a dayan and a shofet? Great question. Dayan is a judge who sits on religious affairs, usually in the chief rabbinate or rabbinical courts for Jews. A shofet serves on civil issues in Israel. By the way, just like I just said about the rabbinic courts, there's also the same religious courts for Christians and Muslims, because that is how this country is run since the Ottoman Empire times. So a dayan will serve on issues related to Jewish religious matters. The same can be said, not a dayan, obviously, a qadi in that case for Muslims, priest for Christians. Shofet is a judge on civil issues, meaning on civil law, regardless of one's ethnicity or religious identity in the state of Israel. Confusing headline to me, Brina asks. Sounds like only the Muslim was appointed judge and the woman is what? No judge stated after woman. That's incorrect, Brina. Like I said, it was talking about, for the first time, a Muslim judge and a woman of Mizrahi background. That is the literal translation. A Muslim judge and a woman of Mizrahi background. That they didn't say that the woman was also a judge, I agree, that is we can call that the issue of journalism. We can call that ongoing issues of gender in Israeli society. But the point is, both of them were appointed. One was referred to a judge. The other one was just referred to by their gender. Nasser asks, is it often the word Mizrahi interchanged with Sfaradi? That's a great question. They often are interchanged. It's incorrect, but they are often interchanged. Usually people will just say either Mizrahi or Ashkenazi and Sfaradi. All of the terms are actually incorrect because they don't get into the diversity of the Jewish diaspora experience. Many of those same minhagim, those same traditions and customs are still ascribed to in the modern state of Israel, despite being all together in that psefas, that mosaic that the justice minister was talking about. But yes, it often is interchanged, I would say incorrectly. They're all sort of very loose terms, to say the least. Okay. Susan, she actually wasn't reading slow enough for me. Is there a way to slow down the news feed? Susan, just press the pause. Sorry, she's reading really slow for a news broadcaster. And again, it's made for all of us. It's not made specifically for Olim. So even other iterations of that slower news is going to be read pretty much at that tempo. So I would just recommend picking a news article and listening to it repeatedly to get used to the tempo. But she is speaking at a specifically slower speed. Jeanette asks, is there a website like Hadshon that has simultaneous English subtitles for a bit of a cheat if we need it? There is not, Jeanette, that's a great question. You can certainly read back and forth, right? If there's an ongoing story, you could then read it back in another news source in that, but there aren't. There is, I know certainly in Diaspora, Jerusalem Post publishes a easy Hebrew format with stories, and that also gives vocab lists. But Hadshon is one of the better resources out there. Okay. Okay, looking for some of these other questions. Miri asks, so the news organizations that are part of Netanyahu's corruption charges considered trustworthy and impartial now? That's a great question. We're going to talk more about the landscape of Israeli media outlets in the next few weeks. So I'm going to come back to that question actually. Rose asks, I find Ma'ariv to be an easier newspaper to read, less colloquial than Yediot. Do they have a website? I believe they do, Rose. I believe it's ma'ariv.co.il. 2 A's, so MAARIV.co.il. Ma'ariv has gone down quite a lot in circulation. They're not as big, certainly online, as the big ones like Ynet, Walla, Yisrael Hayom, and so forth. But great question. Okay. Again, Arut Sheva, we're going to talk about more media outlets shortly. Again, if you want breaking news, Ynet, Walla, Khan, Mako, the major TV stations also have that as well. Okay. Shirley, how many judges in the Supreme Court? 15. Again, highly recommend reading the Wikipedia article on the Supreme Court. Really good breakdown of it. Jackie and Marty ask, please further explain the difference of ha-meshakef and she-meshakef. And can you give other examples of how the ha and sha are used? Great question. Okay, so like I said, let me pull that up again. The news headline. Let me see where it was, just a second. Here it is. Okay, let me get back to it. Share. Okay, as you see here, it says that very last line of the quote of that short summary of the article and the quote from the Justice Minister, Herkev meguvan umeuzan המשקף את הפסיפס החברתי. Only in the present tense can ha be used instead of she. And it's only in formal settings. You're not typically going to talk everyday conversations with friends, with family members, and use ha instead of she. It is considered higher level Hebrew. Think of it like the equivalent of which or that, even though that and she are the same thing, but it's more like which. It's a little bit higher up. It doesn't mean you can't use it all the time. It's just not used in everyday conversation, certainly in informal settings. First off, this line is too formal to be used in an anyday conversation. But again, in the present tense, when you want to use the article she, meaning that or which, you can substitute ha instead. That's basically the rule. You can't do it in the past tense or in the future tense, only in the present tense. And it's only used in more formal settings. So there are endless examples that you could use for that. But again, it's only in the present tense that you'll see ha mishakef instead of she mishakef. And again, formal Hebrew because he's being quoted by a news outlet. Okay, just a few more questions here. I see two people saying things that are, again, not what I said. You can click to get English, one person says, and if you activate Google Translate on your browser, it will translate ynet.co.il. Folks, please do not use Google Translate. We've talked about this before. Google Translate will help you in about 50% of the time. It'll give you the general gist, and oftentimes it is not equipped to deal with the ongoing evolution of a living language, Hebrew included. If you want to use a better translator service, we've talked about these many times before. One is called Milon Morphix, M-O-R-F-I-X, and the other one is called Context Reverso. You can go back and forth, English to Hebrew, Hebrew to English with both of those. Okay, but Google Translate is at best 50% good. Please, the point of this is to understand how to get using in Hebrew. Otherwise, you can use Google Translate till the proverbial cows come home. It's not going to help you learn Hebrew. Sorry, it's not. I will definitely fight anyone, mitnaged, over that. Will oppose anyone who says so otherwise. All right, let's keep going. Irene asks, how would you say the last line in everyday language? Great question. Let's look at that last line. That's a great question. הרכב מגוון ומאוזן המשקף את פסיפס החברתי. I would change this whole thing just like I would in English, right? I would say, no, I wouldn't even say that because we're talking about a big, an important topic. But if I were, no, it's a great question, but I can't see any other way to say this. Because number one, it's a government minister. Number two, they're talking about the Supreme Court, and number three, they're talking about it in a mainstream news outlet. So it needs to be in higher level Hebrew here. But you could say ההרכב משקף את הפסיפס המגוון ומאוזן של מדינת ישראל, right? The composition reflects the diverse and balanced mosaic of Israeli society, something along those lines, where you're basically moving around the words and you're creating a more subject, verb, object type of sentence. But this is quite a proper, good, higher level Hebrew sentence there. Okay, let me just make sure. Q&A, sorry. Please repeat translation resources. Okay, folks, listen very carefully. Stop whatever you're doing. Listen to what I'm saying. Milon, M-I-L-O-N, Morphix, M-O-R-F-I-X. Just type it into Google. You'll find it. The other one is Context, C-O-N-T-E-X-T, Reverso, R-E-V-E-R-S-O. Type in either of those into Google. You will get the websites. You can use them at your convenience. Richard asks a great question. First off, Anonymous, does Chadshon only upload once a day? Yes, it does, because those that I read today was from 6 in the morning. So it's only once a day. It is not good for breaking news, but the previous day's news, no less important. Okay. Richard asked, do you need to place the letter Hey before both Beit HaMishpat HaElyon, or can you simply say Beit Mishpat HaElyon? Great question. This gets into a very important piece of Hebrew grammar that you really need to understand, folks. It is the equivalent in Hebrew of compound words in English. Compound words were often taught in an early stage, like doghouse, schoolhouse, anything that puts together two nouns. Hebrew uses these a lot. Remember that Hebrew vocabulary is very conservative. We don't have nearly the same number of words like English and other languages do. So we need to create new words. And the way we do that is we put two nouns together. We change the pronunciation of one of the words, and the last word will become definite or not. Beit HaMishpat HaElyon. Why is that the case? Beit and Mishpat are the two nouns. Elyon is an adjective. Okay, so Bait turns into Beit. Mishpat turns into HaMishpat, because we're not just talking about any court. A court would be Beit Mishpat. The court, Beit HaMishpat. The definite article goes on the last word in that chain of compound nouns, not compound words, right? So Beit Mishpat, a court. Beit HaMishpat, the court. And once we have indicated that's definite, it's the court, any adjective that comes afterwards also has to be definite. Beit HaMishpat HaElyon, the Supreme Court, right? If it was the red court, Beit HaMishpat HaAdom, right? Beit HaMishpat, the court, HaAdom, the red court, right? So to ensure that everything is definite, the last word in that chain of nouns has to have ha as the prefix, as do any adjectives that modify it. So it's not just Beit HaMishpat, it's not just the court, it's Beit HaMishpat HaElyon, the Supreme Court. Okay, so it absolutely has to be Beit HaMishpat HaElyon. No way around that. You will hear people incorrectly say Beit Mishpat HaElyon. That is incorrect. It's Beit HaMishpat HaElyon. Just like I'm going to the cafe is not the only correct way to say, I'm not going to say the incorrect way because most people say that, is Beit HaCafe. A cafe is Beit Cafe. The cafe, Beit HaCafe. Okay, you will often hear people say something different. I'm not going to say it lest you believe that to be true, even though I'm saying it's not true. Beit HaCafe is the cafe. Beit HaMishpat, the court. Okay. So with that, we are just out of time. Toda rabah. Thank you all so much for joining. We will see you all next week for another class. In the meantime, this lesson will go up on YouTube in the next 1 to 2 days. If you have any topics that you'd like us to cover, please be in touch directly with Nefesh B'Nefesh. We'd love to hear from you. Any suggestions you have for future topics, please go through YouTube for all the class sessions. And like I said, toda rabah. Thank you all so much, and lehitraot. See you all very soon. Take care.